And we are live. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Isaac. Great to be here.
You're so welcome.
This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. So, do you guys have anything that you want to start with? I guess to introduce what we're doing the Introduction to Nietzsche course on the Peterson Academy.
Yes.
And primarily covering the first 4 lectures.
Yep, that's it. I haven't gotten to the 4th lecture yet, but I will follow along.
I have, I guess it's a little bit nebulous in my mind right now, but one, I think, interconnected theme that I want to talk about that might branch into some different ideas that Peterson talks about. And we can talk about what you want, like we can hear your ideas for what to discuss as well before I go too deep into that. But if I could try to broadly and succinctly summarize it, it has to do with we have to have some sort of framework to act and to perceive in the world. It seems to me. Mm-hmm. And I guess I want to look at I want to explore the idea that we need such a framework, mm-hmm. and then also look at what the best frameworks are and like how to adopt that framework and what that framework looks like, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Got anything,
Cool.
Thomas?
Yeah, at some point I want to ask about. Well, I had a question when listening to the 4th lecture about questioning morality, and he's talking about questioning the idea of opposites and questioning the idea that good and evil are opposites, and proposing the idea that in order to be good, you need to incorporate your dark side,
mm-hmm.
right? So. To me, it's more obvious how someone who's gone too far in the dark side could incorporate that to become good, right? And it's less obvious for how someone who's like too sheltered on like the good side, too like prude or too, like how can they incorporate their dark side without?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have to actually plunge into that dark side first, or is there a way to go right to the middle, or close to the middle without going too far into the dark side?
Yeah, I have a thought already, so I'm gonna jot it down.
Yeah, so for me, what I want to do is more understand his literary devices, through not necessarily through this discussion, but overall through taking this course, I want to understand his use of language, his use of aphorisms, and how to develop that skill myself. And kind of learn his literary devices and apply that to my writing and the way I think, to think in more condensed forms and because I think deeply. I don't really think quickly so much, and so I think it would be good to learn some of these skills. And the other thing is Peterson talks a lot about Nietzsche and Dostoevsky both saw, and Carl Jung saw 150 years into the future, because they could see the patterns of social events, and that's people's thought and stuff like that. So that's something I think that's really important to tap into as an intellectual or as an artist, is to tap into where people are mentally, psychologically, where society is, and how to speak to them, how to kind of tilt. Because as an artist and as an intellectual, you have a lot of power in how you direct the culture. And so it's really important to know where you want to direct the culture and why and how.
And where the culture's going.
And where the culture is going now. So what do you have to work with?
Do you think that Nietzsche directed the culture much, or do you think he was just observing where it was going?
That's a good question. I don't... well... Yeah, that is actually a great question. I'm not sure.
Well, so one thing I think it's probably both. I'm not like super familiar with his work, so I can't speak to it too much. But in Beyond Good and Evil, at one point he talks about questioning first he talks about questioning whether people who in the past, like such as a lot of philosophers who have claimed to be pursuing truth, were actually had a pure will to truth, right? And that's the first question he asks.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, but then I realized that there was a deeper question, which is, what's even the value of pursuing truth?
Mm-hmm.
And he says that that's a question that he thinks that no one before him has really dared to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, and he doesn't do it lightly either. He says it's probably the most, how does he put it? He says, for there is a hazard in it, and perhaps there exists no greater hazard than to pose that question.
Mm.
To propose the question of, is it valuable to pursue truth?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
To question the value of pursuing truth.
Yeah,
in the
I
first
think
place.
that's true for questioning most traditions in general. Because I think partly what holds our society together are the traditions, right, that we've been following for years, and oftentimes we don't know why we're following them. But those things, even when we don't know what the reason is, there's often a reason, and it's a good reason. And those traditions hold our culture together. And when we question them, and don't have an answer for why we should keep them, and when we get rid of them, then we're unknowingly getting rid of the foundation of our culture. And like questioning, and it seems to me like that idea that the pursuit of truth is a good thing is one of the most foundational aspects of a culture. And then when you undermine that, then it seems like Nietzsche understood that if you undermine that, you're going to undermine the culture, which is why he said, right?
It's the most dangerous thing you could do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, if you guys don't mind, can I jump into my question?
Yeah.
Because I think that's a good segue. Is that,
Yeah.
It's quite a segue.
Quite a segue.
Oh, that's quite a segue.
So it's hard to know exactly where to start, but it seemed to me that Peterson, throughout these lectures, one of the topics he was exploring was the notion of having a framework. I think he would use the word ethic, or perhaps a morality, or a value system. That is something wrong with audio.
Oh no, sorry.
Okay.
So I guess I'm trying to do this as I go. I haven't done it in this setting.
Sure.
So
I keep seeing it jump back. Is that a problem?
No, let's just go to the next measure.
Okay, got it. So yeah, this is not going to be the best, but it's what we have right now.
Okay, so
Sorry, go ahead.
No. So for instance, this is a quote from Peterson, right? So he says, "You need a reason to move forward in certainty because otherwise you move forward in doubt. And the problem with moving forward in doubt is you don't move forward. Anything can stop you because first of all, you're not motivated to go because you don't believe in the destination. But second, you're weak, rife with doubt. Virtually anything can stop you. That's a radical demoralization on the psychological front, but also on the social front. You can't unite yourself in cooperation and competition with other people. That makes a whole culture weak." So that seems to be just talking about if you don't have, if you don't believe. Okay, sorry. This was in reference to the temptation to moral relativism. Okay, because he says that if you look around at all the cultures that are around the world and through history, you notice that they worship different gods, so to speak. They have different frameworks, different what is it? Summum bonums, right? Different highest goods, different hierarchies of values, different ethics, different value systems, moralities, and you might. So that might cause you to ask yourself, what makes me think that mine is right, for one thing.
That's like one of the major questions that we were faced with probably as kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are you guys Catholic? What makes you so sure that is the objective truth?
Right. But the more insidious or pernicious question that you might ask from that is, which I think really is a form of despair, is what makes you think that any morality is right at all. And so Peterson, in that quote I just talked about, is discussing the ramifications of a stance like that, where you have doubt in all value systems intrinsically, right? And so now you can't select one and move forward with confidence because he says you don't believe in the destination, and so anything can stop you on the way. So I think that's like sort of in the realm of action, but I think also it falls in the realm of perception, because so there's that whole thing about what you see what you're looking for, right? And if you can't decide on what you're like Jack Sparrow, right? He doesn't know what he wants.
Right.
If you can't decide on what you're looking for, then you're not gonna have a unified framework for what you're gonna see. Right? You're gonna see
Yeah.
And so I think it's you. I guess I'm saying that the despair, or like nihilism, or the despair of value systems in general bleeds into both the realm of action and the realm of perception.
Yeah. So like you which is why it's hard to change your behavior, because that entails changing your perception, which is like, well, I guess it's easier to change your behavior than it is to change your perception, maybe. Or I mean, well, they affect each other, right? So if you change your behavior over time, that will change. When you change your behavior, you have to act against your perception.
Or you have to change your perception.
Or yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're going against your given perception.
Sure.
And then through repeated behavior changes over time, that can change your perception.
Sorry. One more thing to add is that for the realm of perception, because as Peterson notes that there at any given point there's an infinite array of facts to which we could attend. If you don't have a framework for which facts to select and attend to, then there's a good chance that you'll be, seems to me like it would follow that you'd be overwhelmed by the sheer number of facts, right?
Yeah.
And plunged into chaos, essentially, psychologically.
Yeah. You're paralyzed. You don't know what to think or what to do.
And he says that the question of why do you select the facts that you do, when right, like to attend to,
right,
whether consciously or subconsciously, usually unconsciously, right? That question of why you select those facts, he says, is the question. So that's like a little bit what I'm looking to explore.
Yeah. So I have a question, actually.
Okay.
One thing that stood out to me when you're talking was you need to be certain about something in order to move forward. And if you're uncertain, you can't move forward, right? So what are the things that we need to be certain about? What's like the first things we should be certain about? It seems to me like the pursuit of truth is one of the most foundational things we should be certain about.
I agree.
Is there anything else? Like, what's the next step, I guess?
Well, first I want to explore that question, because Nietzsche calls that into doubt, I think. Or
right.
He begs the question whether the pursuit of truth is the most valuable thing. One thought that occurred to me, I don't know if this is going to make a lot of sense, but in my mind, we're always acting toward a goal, okay? And if we don't have a goal, then we're not moving at all, right? And sometimes our lives are like more or less, to varying degrees, integrated into like a conscious overarching goal, but we always have some sort of goal. Like even if we're like laying in bed, and we kind of given up on life, our goal at that moment is probably just to seek comfort in laying in our bed, and
security or safety.
Right. So I think to me, it seems like what's at the end of that list of goals, you could define that as happiness. You could say like the definition of happiness is whatever is at the very end of the list of the chain of goals that any human being has. And what?
Is that supposed to be on the light?
What light?
This light?
Oh no.
Okay. Sorry.
It could be on. I don't know if it'll help though.
Alright, whatever.
So I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that it seems to me like and I don't think we can help that. And it seems to me like happiness precedes is prior and more fundamental than truth.
Yes.
And that poses an issue that Nietzsche brings up. He says, like, why not believe in falsehoods that serve life more? Especially if happiness.
Could you before we continue, could you explain what you mean by happiness?
The whatever's at the end of the list of goals. So why are we having this conversation to get to know Nietzsche's work better? Why do we want to do that? Because we want to grow in like intellectual competence. Why do we want to do that? Right. So you can continue asking this question until you get to the point where you just say, it's because I want to be happy.
And Aidan, you and I were talking earlier about being a complete human person. I think that's a good definition of happiness, being a full human person.
Yeah, so the word happiness has, I think, a lot of baggage with it. Mm-hmm. So I hesitate to use that word.
It's not hedonic pleasure.
Right. I'm just saying scrap all the baggage and define it as whatever is at the end, the final terminus of all goals.
Okay.
Anyways, so let me finish my thought before we dive into that. If happiness, as it seems to me, is prior on the list of, if happiness is like what all goals are oriented to, then if we're pursuing truth, then we're doing that for the sake of happiness. And if that's the case, then we pose the risk of, what if something appears to be more conducive to our happiness than truth does? Then we might be inclined to sacrifice truth. So I'm wondering if the only way to have a pure will to truth, a will to truth that is unhindered by other temptations, maybe the only way to have that is to equate truth with goodness, to say that truth itself is goodness itself, and truth itself is, therein lies our final happiness. Does that make sense? So to posit truth as the
as
final
happiness.
goal,
as the good.
right?
Yeah.
To equate the two.
Yeah.
That's my full train of thought. Now you
no, I
do what you want.
Yeah, no, I before you got to your end, I was gonna question the whole. In my mind, I was questioning. Okay, well, it seems to me like I would rather sacrifice happiness for truth than sacrifice truth for happiness.
But it depends. I think it depends on
Depends on what you mean by happiness.
I think that hinges on a weak definition of happiness, or a colloquial definition of happiness.
Not even necessarily. I think
at least a definition of happiness that is not the one I was describing. Because
I would say, no, I agree with the conclusion that I think truth is that end goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think by your definition of happiness, you can't do that if they're the same thing. You can't sacrifice one for the other if they're the same thing.
Right.
Right. But if we assume for a second that they're not the same thing, then no matter what the happiness is, I think you should sacrifice it for the truth.
I think that's impossible is what I'm trying to say. I think by definition,
Yeah, but he said,
if you pursue truth, you're doing that in order to attain some ultimate goal. It's either truth is that ultimate goal, or
Right.
you're pursuing truth in order to get to a deeper goal.
Right.
And that whatever the deepest goal is, I'm defining that as happiness or the good.
Okay.
so
So
Aidan,
I'm saying
you
by
and,
definition, you
Yeah,
can't.
I like the word good way better than happiness.
Okay.
so you and I were talking about this when I was driving over, and I was saying that truth is in service of the good.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't seem to like that.
Okay, I don't
because
recall why.
You were saying that sometimes it's just good to just know things and contemplating
Oh,
and knowing things just for the sake of.
I was trying to say,
No.
it sounded to me like you were saying, like positing a sort of utilitarian view of truth, where like the only reason to consider truth and consider things is in order to do something else with them. And I don't necessarily think that's the case.
No, I was
Okay,
saying
I was
exactly
just
what.
I was misinterpreting what you were saying then.
Yeah, I was just saying what you just said.
Which I think if you don't posit truth as the same thing as the good, essentially, then you would maybe run into the problem that I was reacting against of like the only reason to consider
Sorry,
truth.
what was your premise? If
If you don't equate truth with like capital T
yeah.
truth with capital G goodness,
Yeah.
then you potentially run into the problem of that I was reacting against of always, or there's always a temptation to subject truth to a different end.
No, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but that's not the same thing as saying that truth and goodness are the same, and that, but you could still say that truth is in service of the good.
Okay.
That,
Yeah.
That truth leads to the good. Right? I mean, that is what you almost said that exactly. That truth.
You're saying that truth is the good, right?
I think that's
Well,
what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, you said the truth is the good, but that dang it, I don't remember exactly. verbatim.
I think-
Is there a distinction to be made between truth and goodness?
I think maybe only conceptual. Like some distinctions don't, I think, really exist in reality.
It's like the difference
but
in the Trinity.
they can be useful for the sake of our understanding to. I don't. Yeah.
It might make sense to say you could say
Purely conceptual.
you could have like a capital G good, right, or
Uh-huh.
happiness or whatever word you want to use.
Yeah,
as
let's
like
use the word good.
but let's put a capital G,
Mm-hmm.
and then you could have the three facets be like truth, goodness, and beauty.
Mhm.
Like and like the Lordness of good, lowercase G for like, you know what I'm saying, like the different facets. It's like if the facet goodness is different from like the facet truth of like the capital G good.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe is
But
one way of looking at it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be open to thinking about it that way.
Right.
What would the distinctions be between capital G good and lower G good?
I'm
Well,
just using the capital G good as a substitute for happiness because
Yeah,
I just don't like the word happiness.
Happiness has baggage.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
Okay.
I think it's confusing.
Well, we could bet any word in
But
that.
to distinguish them, I mean, like if we say, and maybe this is like with just purely with the lower T truth and the lower G good and all that, we say like that piece that you played was very beautiful. It would be kind of clunky and confusing to say that was a true piece, right? Even though there might be some truth in that.
I totally agree.
I
I honestly, as a side tangent, I don't like the way Jordan Peterson and I guess Jordan Peterson mostly talks about truth.
Okay.
He uses it in a weird way.
How so?
I mean, we don't want to get into this necessarily, but we have like his whole argument with Sam Harris. You know, a few years ago, did you guys listen to that?
Well, no.
There's one like where like the very first time they met.
I remember you telling me this.
It was they just got bogged down. Part of it was Jordan Peterson was sick at the time, so
Yeah.
anyway, but they couldn't agree on a definition of truth, so they couldn't even get the conversation started.
Brutal.
But and I think Brett Weinstein at one point stepped in as a moderator and made a distinction between literal truth and metaphorical truth, right? Where literal truth was like, like there are like 10 million hairs on my head or something, and then a metaphorical truth is
the hair on my head.
no. He gave an example of
Hamlet.
I don't remember that example, but
Oh, sorry.
The one example he gave was a gun is always treat a gun as if it's loaded, right? Like the gun is loaded is the metaphorical truth.
Right. So I think it's the distinction between fictions and falsehoods.
Yeah. So I guess I don't like the idea that something is useful, therefore it is true.
I don't like that either.
Yeah. And that seems to me what Jordan Peterson's pushing.
He does. Yeah.
I remember
Uncle
Uncle Paul criticized. I was talking about him. I was talking about Jordan Peterson to him, and Uncle Paul was like, "He's a utilitarian."
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far either. but
he does seem to flirt with that.
Yeah. Uncle Paul's point was that he uses the word useful a lot.
Yes, he does. He sure does.
Sure does.
Okay. If I am going on for too long, you guys can feel free to not derail, but take over the discussion. But related to this thought of like equating, the reason I find the equation. Stop. I'll wait. The reason I find it interesting to equate goodness with truth is that I'm interested in figuring out what is the spirit, what is the ethic, what is the framework, what is the value system that one has to take in order to discern the truth. Because Peterson says if you don't have a pure will to the truth, then the facts will not present themselves to you such that you will discover the truth. Because you see what you're looking for, right? So that's his argument. He says if you put your career first in scientist, it's impossible to be a genuine scientist,
Right. Yeah.
Because even he says like your career is super important. He acknowledges that, but he says if truth is not first, then you won't even be able to do good science. And I'm open to discussing that more, or to casting doubt on that. But I'm just interested in what is the correct framework, or ethic, or morality or value system to approach the world such that you have a pure will to truth, and that truth is not subject to other things.
So maybe we could put it in a syllogism. Will to truth is necessary. No, you see what you look for.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a will to truth, you are looking for truth. Therefore, when you have a will to truth, you will get truth.
You'll see truth.
If you ask, you will receive.
Right.
If you seek, you will find.
Mm-hmm.
If you knock, the door will be open.
Mm-hmm. And to go back to my earlier point, it seems to me that the ethic that would best facilitate you like a genuine and pure will to truth, such that you could actually see the truth, that ethic would be equating truth with goodness.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right.
And I think that's what historically the West has done in the notion of God being goodness itself and God being truth itself.
So there again, good seems to precede truth, because goodness is the moral structure.
I think so.
In which
yes.
truth is valuable.
Yes,
So,
but I think either it's maybe I'm speaking sort of paradoxically, because on the one hand I think that the good has to precede truth in some sense, because the good is ultimately, like I'm defining it as what you do everything for. And unless truth is the same thing as the good, then goodness will always precede the truth in terms of importance.
Yeah. So
does that make sense?
So if truth and goodness aren't the same thing, then goodness precedes and is the source and the summit of truth. Right. But I think maybe the Trinity is the distinctions within the Trinity is a good analogy with the distinctions between goodness and truth.
Okay.
Because Jesus says, "I and the Father
One.
and I are one." But there are distinctions. We say that the Son proceeds from the Father and the Spirit. Right?
Yeah. Right.
So,
right.
So like there's this unity and distinction within the Trinity. It's like they're like the same. They're the same God. They're different persons. They have different missions. Is I think is the term Aquinas uses. And I think we can look at like Jesus is the Logos. He's the truth. Jesus says, "I am the truth and the life." And like this, he comes from the Father. You know, so like
proceeds right from.
He proceeds from the Father. So like he is eternal. He's everlasting. The way truth is, and because he is truth. But he comes from the Father, who is also eternal and good. So So maybe the way Jesus is to the Father, God the Son is to the Father, the way truth is to goodness.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, Thomas, do you have any thoughts? Completely different questions or themes you want to explore? Or?
Yeah, what do you guys think about my question I asked at the beginning?
Sorry, what was that again?
So, gosh dang it, Aidan.
Let's pay back.
So it's about integrating your shadow.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is, the gap in my knowledge, at least, is how would someone who is okay? It's more obvious to me how someone who has gone too far down the shadow to incorporate that into themselves and pursue the good, use it to pursue the good. It's less obvious to me how someone who finds themselves too far away from too far separated from the shadow, right? How does that person incorporate the shadow without? Is it necessary to go too far in the other direction in order to find the middle ground?
I think it's a good question, and I wanted this before. I'll propose something. You guys can destroy it if you want to. This seems to be
destroy, build, destroy.
Philosophizing with a hammer. Destroy, build, destroy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way I've tried to resolve that is by not focusing on ways in which I can integrate my shadow, but instead focusing on following my conscience. Because I think when you genuinely try to follow your conscience and don't try to trick yourself or lie yourself, there are times when your conscience will call you to do something that is more aggressive or like violent or something like that. Shadow
disturbs social norms or something.
Right,
like
or shadow adjacent or
right.
Than you're used to. And so I kind of think that just the mission of following your conscience will automatically lead you down that straight and narrow path.
Yeah. If you focus too much on the shadow as such, then you're gonna start doing bad things.
Right. You'll probably fall into too far into the shadow.
But if you I like this. But if you follow your conscience and make that your emphasis, then you will integrate your shadow as an effect.
And also, like, why try to integrate your shadow except for the sake of ultimately following your conscience? Right. So if that's ultimately what your goal is for even pursuing the integration of your shadow, then you might as well just pursue the goal itself, like focus on the goal itself of following your conscience.
Not let things get in your way.
Exactly.
I like that a lot.
Idea.
That's really good.
Yep.
And I've noticed that like in my experience that like there are times when my conscience calls me to like speak up to someone, or like stand up for myself, even though that's not really, that's more in the shadow area than I'm used to temperamentally or something,
Yeah.
or inclined to temperamentally.
And again, Jesus talks about this too. He says, be as peaceful as doves and cunning as serpents.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you? Just that line on itself. I don't remember the full context. I think he was sending out. Was it when he was sending out the 72?
I'm not sure.
Disciples to preach whatever.
I'm not sure.
I forget. Anyways, what do you think of that, Thomas?
I like that phrase.
Peaceful as doves, cunning as serpents.
Is it peaceful? Is that the word?
Pretty sure.
That's one of the translations.
Okay.
Pull up, Jamie.
Yeah, pull that up, Jamie.
I'm not trying to be obnoxious. I just want to get it right since we're on camera.
Mm-hmm.
Doves. Okay, so I see be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves.
Innocent.
That's another.
Okay. And as harmless as doves and as wise as serpents.
Wise is an interesting word.
Right.
Yeah.
It is an interesting word.
Wise, cunning.
They don't necessarily seem like the same thing to me.
They don't to me either. Yeah. I'm only seeing
a wise guy.
I'm not seeing the word peaceful, but I'm seeing innocent and gentle and harmless. I don't like the word harmless though.
Yeah, I don't like that word either. Here, according to Aquinas, they're facets of, so they're the cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. And integral parts of prudence are memory, understanding, docility, shrewdness, reason, foresight, circumspection, and caution. Interesting. So, shrewdness seems to be cunningness, right?
Right. That's yeah. Yeah, I can see that being replaced.
Yeah, that's
the word wise or cunning being replaced with that word.
Right, and so that's part of prudence, and prudence is the moral virtues and the gifts of the Holy Spirit correlate with each other, and the gifts of the Holy Spirit that correlates with prudence is wisdom.
Interesting.
If I have
Say
that
it again.
So they're the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
And they correlate with the virtues.
Okay. And
the gift of the Holy Spirit that correlates with the virtue prudence is wisdom.
Interesting.
And so, I definitely see the wisdom being in the word cloud with
prudence. That makes sense.
With prudence and shrewd by effect.
I would still say it's in the word
cunning.
cloud of cunning and shrewdness, but it seems like there's a distinction still.
Jade's cunning.
Yeah. Because cunning seems like, when I hear cunning, I think sneaky or sneaky,
like using your intellect to like malicious ends or something like that.
Not even necessarily malicious.
Expedient.
No, not expedient. I would say just
inexperienced.
No, like rebellious maybe. That's not exactly the right word either, but kind of
like secretive because you don't want to be
secretive in opposition to kind of.
Yeah.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cunning. Okay. But why? In opposition to what?
I don't know, but anything. Like if someone's cunning in
it's like they want to evade being seen in their intellectual endeavor or something, or in their
right. They have a goal they're trying to reach, and they're trying to reach that in opposition to somebody, right? Usually, and they're pursuing their goal intelligently and undiscovered.
So
yes, that seems right to me.
I think that fits perfectly with being a saint, except for maybe being undiscovered. So I was agreeing with everything you were saying, like in the context of living a whole.
I'm not saying you should do this. I'm just saying that
Right.
that's where cunning seems to mean to me.
Right. He's working at it not from the assumption that cunning is a saintly virtue, but from our experience of how we use the word cunning.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just saying that it works perfectly.
Oh, except for
Okay, I see.
Except for the part that you're undiscovered.
I see.
So because we have an obligation. So we're using our intelligence. We're using our all of our faculties to reach the end of heaven, right? And to reach ultimate good, heaven.
yeah,
I knew that's what you're thinking.
to reach the ultimate good, right? And and Jesus has the parable of wicked people are use their intelligence to do wicked things, right? And so why would you not use your intelligence and all your faculties, everything you've got, for the most important thing, pursuing the highest good, right? Anyways, so he says, be cunning, and in pursuing your goal, right? In pursuing this goal, and in opposition to the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? The temptations to not pursue the highest good and to not live by the truth, right? So you are going in opposition.
Right. Interesting.
Okay, how do we get here?
Holy shit, Morty! How did I get here? How did you get there?
We're talking about prudence and the subcategories of prudence, right?
Well, we were talking before that. We were talking about as wise as serpents and as innocent or as peaceful as doves. But what were we talking about before that?
Talking about
integrating shadow. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, you asked what Thomas thinks of that phrase, right?
Right.
Anyways, check.
Isaac, you wanted to talk about aphorisms and how to develop that skill, right?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily have much to say about it, but it's just a goal of mine in studying Nietzsche is to learn how to do that well.
Yeah. So you said you think deeply but not quickly.
I actually am not sure about that, because.
Yeah, I don't think you're thinking deeply or quickly.
Yeah, dude. well, I mean, like, haha, very funny, very funny,
very funny,
very, very funny. I think I do think things very deeply, and sometimes it'll just take time to I guess codify. Maybe just because I'm young. I don't know. I haven't really been in do or die situations in terms of.
Can I finish my thought?
Sure. I didn't know you were thinking.
No, you're good. You said that is what you said, but whether it's accurate or not, it sounded like you were suggesting that to pursue the skill of speaking and thinking aphoristically would be to pursue the skill of thinking quickly as well as deeply. Is that right? If that's what you're thinking, I would push back on that a little bit, because I think Peterson was saying that that Nietzsche's aphorisms were not quick thoughts. They were the result of lots and lots of long contemplation, distilling all that over time into condensed forms.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Yeah, so I suppose I don't know why I said that. I was just talking. I don't know.
Sure.
Spoke out of my ass, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyways,
one interesting thought about that I have is Nietzsche stood out from his peers in that sense that he wrote that way, right? That wasn't. So I don't know. I mean, obviously he's also one of the greats, right? So maybe is something that maybe is worthwhile to try to imitate that to an extent, but also maybe part of the reason he was so great is because he kind of did his own thing and didn't try to conform to the normal way of thinking. He just thought the way he naturally thought.
Yeah.
So maybe not saying that you shouldn't try to learn from his aphorisms and try to imitate that in some sense, but maybe the biggest takeaway is to figure out how you think and think that way.
100%. Yeah, I love that. But part of how we get there is through imitation.
Yeah.
I think that's hugely important. I think we tend to, I think our like society overemphasizes, to go back to what we were talking about before the podcast started, overemphasizes creativity for its own sake, as though, or was that you and me, or?
Well, he was talking about that in the lecture.
Right.
Which lecture was that?
I think in lecture 4.
Oh, yeah.
So
It's not an inherent virtue like we think it is.
Yeah.
Originality.
Right.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And
That's true.
And I don't think Nietzsche is a great thinker because he was original necessarily.
Right.
He was original. If he was original, he was if his greatness consists in his originality, is because he was original in significant ways, not just original.
Right. Of course. Of course. And I'm not necessarily saying you need to be original in your thinking either, but there's a natural way that, unrelated to this course, Jordan Peterson talks about gambling with your personality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how you have a temperament that's pretty stable from birth to death, and it changes a little bit, but not very much. And there's in part of what holds a society together is the tension between the different personalities, right? Because the world is so complicated that you can't mathematically analyze everything and figure out the best possible course of action every single time.
Mm-hmm.
So you have different people that have different inclinations, different ways they're inclined to act in certain situations,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to learn. Part of what makes the society function is that people with different inclinations go with their inclinations, and those people act. There's like an opponent processing.
Yeah,
in that, right?
I like that a lot.
So you gotta learn to behave according to your temperament to an extent, and make adjustments as needed, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think the same kind of concept applies to how you think about things, right? Just because Nietzsche thinks in aphorisms doesn't mean you need to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
aphorisms.
so that tension between temperaments can happen within yourself, of like you go along with what's normal to some degree, but you also are original to some degree.
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that your ideas have to be original, right? I'm just saying just act the way you're according to your temperament.
Right.
You used the phrase opposition.
Opponent processing.
Yeah. What does that mean?
I may be using the term wrong, but my understanding is that Jordan Peterson gave this example actually in the lecture, where he said artists will have a technique, right, where they'll take one hand and they'll press it in opposition to the direction that they're drawing in with the other hand, and that allows for more
like a straighter line or something.
Straighter line and more precise strokes.
Okay.
And I've noticed this when I drive, right? When you're driving on a highway and you're driving in between two semi-trucks, right? You don't want to stray into either lane at all. I notice myself either have both hands of the steering wheel and I'm either pressing my hands together or pulling them apart.
Yeah.
And they're pulling opposite directions.
Yeah.
It gives me more precision when I'm trying to
Yeah. Super cool.
So, tell me if this is related.
Okay.
I was thinking about, again, the question of, so like Peterson says, you can't be a good scientist unless you have a pure will to truth, essentially, unless that's like your highest priority, right? But I was thinking, well, we have a tremendously scientifically and technologically advanced culture, and I doubt that the majority of scientists had truth as their like genuinely
Yeah, definitely not.
genuine first priority. And so I'm wondering, is it true that in order to discover the truth, that you have to have that as your first priority, but to bring in opponent processing, perhaps it's like that's sort of, that can be a way of arriving at truth if you have multiple people who are, they might be trying to do science in some sense, but they don't necessarily have truth as their first priority. Perhaps like through this sort of, they try this thing and it doesn't work, and this person tries this thing and it doesn't work, this person tries this thing and it doesn't work. Perhaps sort of by trial and error, and people trying like what their inclinations draw them toward. Perhaps some level of truth can be arrived at that way.
Even if you don't have the individuals pursuing truth.
I guess that's what because how else, if Jordan Peterson is right that like 90% of science is not truth first, how can we have such scientifically, technologically advanced society?
Possible alternate answer is that scientists are in the Pareto distribution, right?
Right.
We have only like 1% of scientists making 99% of the discoveries.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah, that's very possible. I was thinking that as well.
But I also think there could be something to what you're saying. Even if you have different groups acting according to their career, right? Apparently this happens with historians a lot too, right? But let's say, for example, you have two schools of thought in a scientific problem, and you have one group of scientists stake the career on this idea, and they're not willing to be open to alternate ideas, right? So they just keep putting forward arguments to support their idea. But you have another group who's doing the same thing with the opposite idea. Then you could, by happenstance, get to the actual truth. That sounds like what you're saying.
That is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Shoot. I was going to say something. I forgot. Talked about the Pareto distribution, and
honestly, that's probably true.
What?
The Pareto distribution.
Oh yeah. No, I think that sounds right.
Yeah.
Damn it. I just. Oh yeah. I was thinking maybe like the natural sciences also, like if we posit that there are different, clearly there are some truths that are like easier to discern, and other like realms of truth that are harder to discern, such as like, let's say, like metaphysics, or the question of like God and like his characteristics and his existence. Like those are more nuanced, harder to discern realms of truth than the natural sciences, you could argue, because the natural sciences will like, they'll punch you in the face if you get it wrong in some sense. Right. Like it's obvious if you're wrong. Right. Well, in some cases.
Yeah.
Right. Like if my goal is to create a rocket ship that gets to Mars, it either does or it doesn't get to Mars.
Calculations are off, and it's gonna
right.
Yeah.
And so it might be the case that my goal is not ultimately truth; it's to get to Mars, and I actually value that even more than the truth.
Right.
But because the goal is like, I guess the truth of the matter is so obvious or something. I don't know if that's the right way to formulate it.
You can't get there without pursuing the truth.
Exactly. Well, you can't
without
arriving at the truth. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess I'm suggesting that with the natural sciences, maybe it's a less still important, but maybe a less important disposition to have truth as your ultimate goal than with more like nuanced questions that are harder to that won't give you as blatant feedback if you're wrong.
I see.
Does that make sense?
So, just to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying it's more important for more abstract
forms of knowledge
to have the truth as your highest good,
Mm-hmm.
because there's not like an engineering project you're going to work on that will fail when you're trying to pursue whether or not certain attributes of God are
Right.
true or false.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I want to push back a little bit about what you said about you saying arrive at truth, not pursue truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, let's say I want to get to Mars, right? And my calculations need to be spot on, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm rushing through my calculations, I don't really care about whether they're true or not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to get there. I have to have, to some extent, have some humility and say that, okay, this is not true, and actually buckle down to pursue the truth.
That's true.
I mean, it's kind of nitpicky. But
And when we established before also that in order to arrive at the truth, you have to pursue the truth, because what you see determines what you.
But that's the whole question. That's the whole thing I'm questioning at this moment. If that is a universal blanket statement in all circumstances, that
also, arriving at the truth of a specific mathematical equation is different from like arriving at the truth. You know.
I suppose.
But also,
Maybe.
what you mentioned that you are pursuing truth. Like in that situation, you have to pursue the truth if you want to get to Mars, right? I would say that's true, but it's not necessarily the case that truth has to be your priority above getting to Mars.
I would say temporarily it does, or at least in the short term it does.
Okay. Fair enough.
In this case, the truth does become utilitarian, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, I guess to your point, we're talking about a different truth.
No, I would just say that it shouldn't be utilitarian.
Right, it shouldn't be.
But you might be able to arrive at the truth by caring about something more than the truth.
Yeah, well, so if you have a goal, then like for example, getting to Mars, you need certain truths in order to get to Mars. You need to know how to build a rocket ship.
Yeah.
Right. And you need to know how to survive in space and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so pursuing that truth is for the end of getting to Mars. But then there needs to be a bigger truth in which the goal of pursuing or the goal of going to Mars is embedded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. What are Elon Musk's reasons for wanting to go to Mars?
Well, for one, you could say to explore Mars, which is another form of pursuit of truth, right? But I also don't think that it necessarily has to be. I don't know if I'm going to say this right. That like, in order of like chronological goals, your ultimate goal has to be, like your final goal has to be knowledge or something. I think that it's more in terms of priority, like what's the more fundamental value for you? Is it truth or is it getting to Mars? And I don't think it has to be a chronological question.
What do you mean chronological?
If I don't think you need to pursue. I don't think you need to like get to Mars in order to have knowledge of Mars, let's say, or in order. I don't think the pursuit of going to Mars has to lead to some knowledge, I guess, in order for truth to be the higher priority.
Right. No. Right.
It doesn't have to be like, first Mars and then I figure something out. Like then I know some truth.
I see.
In order for truth to be your higher priority, I don't think.
I see. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a chronological thing. It's more of a value. Like which
Right,
one
right,
is the
right.
deeper value for you?
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's 8:40.
8:40.
8:40. Oh wow, that's funny. I didn't even set my alarm for that. It's just what time my alarm goes off.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Any other thoughts?
Let me glance through real quick.
Mm-hmm. Nietzsche lived a crazy life.
This is something that's kind of interesting. So this is a quote from Peterson. Unless you guys are
Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it. Like, I'm gotta pee soon though.
Okay.
Joe Rogan pees all the time during his podcast.
Yeah, I know.
You want to take a quick break?
No, it's fine. Just keep going.
Okay.
I didn't eat too.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So this is under my bullet point: faith and necessity of life-affirming courage to fend off nihilism. Okay, and then there's a quote from Peterson there. You could say, I insist upon extracting a life-affirming narrative, regardless of the catastrophes of my experience, and that's something worth thinking about. That allies faith with courage because it's necessary. I would say it's arguably necessary. All of us will undergo terrible losses in our life, including the loss of our own life, the loss of the lives of everyone around us, all those who died before us. That's definitely coming down the pipelines. There's no shortage of catastrophe in your life. So you might say, why not draw the most negative of possible conclusions? And that's a real question. One answer to that is take heart and take courage. And despite all that, strive to walk uphill and do good, despite the fact that the facts, in some sense, might indicate that you have justification for doing something different. And that's worth knowing that you have that moral obligation. Arguably, you have that moral obligation to uphold the good and the valuable and the truth and the true and the good, and the true and the beautiful, despite the catastrophe of your existence. And that could easily include unfair victimization at the hands of other people or the heavy hand of cataclysmic fate. I think he was talking that whole idea of like insisting on extracting a life-affirming narrative from whatever facts, sometimes despite the facts, apparently, right? I think that was in reference or in the same discussion of Nietzsche talking about some like a potential like falsehood or fiction, if we want to use that word instead. The notion that if a truth doesn't serve life, then why believe the truth? Instead, you might want to believe, he says, an untruth.
Right.
And so that seems related. It's like, okay, if everything's going to shit in my life, and everyone around me is dying, and I'm sick and bedridden, and just everything's crap.
All my friends are dead.
Would that be? Would extracting a good narrative or a life affirming narrative, he says, be a falsehood in that situation, believing a falsehood in that situation, or would it be a way of would it be a framework of looking at the world that helps you attend to the certain facts that are actually there that you wouldn't notice if you're just accepting that?
Right, because the whole premise is a life unaffirming or narrative of my everything is crap. Right, everything is crap is the narrative, and so you see all the crap things, and there are plenty of them. Like we said, but you could do that in any life.
You're true, absolutely true.
In any life,
right.
You could do that.
Right.
And you could do the flip side in any life again.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I don't think you can ever really know that. So when you say extract a life-affirming narrative, to me that sounds like that means that to assume that there is a meaning to all this, right? And maybe there's not a meaning, which is where it sounds like you're asking the question: is this a framework to help me cope with my life, or is it a falsehood? Right? It's kind of what you said.
Well, a framework to help me to discern a truth, a deep truth that there actually is meaning and goodness in this, or just a falsehood.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that either there's a underlying truth that gives your life meaning, or there isn't, and I don't think there's really a way to know. But so to me, it makes sense to just assume that there is, and that's not the same thing as believing in a falsehood, because you don't really know. You don't really know either way. So I think it would be unfair to say I'm lying to myself to make myself happy, because because it could be true, right? And you're not going to really
Mm-hmm.
You can't know. I think that's kind of the antidote to nihilism, in my opinion, is not because the nihilists make a true observation, I think, in saying that there's a multitude of interpretations of looking at the world, and we can't really know for sure which one is right or if any of them are right. And I think that is a true,
or at the very least, it's
observation.
extremely difficult. You could say.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, and I don't really think you can ever be 100% true. So I'm 100% certain.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's a true statement, and you can either take that and say, okay, there's no meaning to life, or there's no point to even trying, or you can say that I'm gonna live my life under the assumption that there is a meaningful interpretation, and I'm gonna go with that, and maybe it's and just hope, and I hope that it's true, right? And if it's not true, there's nothing to lose.
Right. It becomes whatever the paradox or the
Pascal's wager.
Pascal's wager. That's thanks.
Yeah. Anyway, but I wanted to say that in opposition to, in my experience, most people's antidote to or criticism of nihilism is to just say that they're wrong.
And just laugh off
Exactly, and say
like belittle their
right, and
observation.
say like, no, like obviously this one's true, right? Obviously my interpretation is true, and I think the antidote that seems more convincing to me is that, okay, no, it's not obviously one that's true, or it's not obvious that any of them are true, but we should assume that there is one that's true because that's the only pathway that could lead to a good outcome.
You embrace, in a way, you embrace uncertainty.
Well, that's why he describes it as faith.
Yeah.
Right. So actually, this whole thing was coming up to me when you were talking at the very beginning of this, when you said you have to be certain to go forward, which is interesting to me because I'm not totally sure if I agree with that. I think you can acknowledge your ignorance and also have faith and charge forward.
Right. So it depends on what you mean by certain, or it depends on what things you're having certainty. You put certainty in, because it could be that you put certainty in. You axiomatically accept some fundamental framework, such as that. No matter the apparent facts, life, the heart of life is good, you might say, or my life has intrinsic meaning. And I'm dubious that if you allow yourself to yeah, I mean, on the one hand, you could have doubts about that, right? But still, like, it might be like a difference between like certainty of will over certainty of like intellect. If you know.
Oh yeah.
So like, I guess one thing that I get hung up on sometimes is like whether, no matter what my disposition is, if maybe you have to be totally committed and believe something is true in order to actually go for it, and intellectually believe it's true. But the truth, like, no matter what, the truth is you don't actually know.
Yeah.
That's the truth. And I have a hard time saying I have to abandon this truth in order to go forward.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think, I know that people I've probably done this before. People say that you have to abandon the possibility, that you have to abandon uncertainty, right? Like you have to act as if you are totally 100% intellectually, like you contain it all in your head, right? When in reality you don't, and you're like Indiana Jones stepping off the cliff onto
the invisible bridge.
The invisible bridge. Yeah.
What? Sorry.
I'm just saying that it's like intellectually he couldn't see it. You know, he couldn't understand.
Right. Exactly.
He couldn't understand.
It was the leap of faith, is what they said.
The whole thing was called the leap of faith. And so he's like, I don't see where I'm gonna. I might die. You know. Here we go. I have to do this.
Yeah.
And so it was certainty of will, like you were saying. Like I'm acting as if this is true.
Right.
And we're gonna hope for the best.
Right.
Should we leave it there?
Yeah, I think it's good.
We could definitely talk about. We talked a lot about good and true, Beauty came up only a few times.
Yeah.
But we didn't really talk about it. But that could be its own podcast.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about that more.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.